What's up, humans, and welcome to another Psicoactivo. I think this is going to drop on the Wednesday because of the wind advisory that is in order. But there's a lot of people that is not having a good time who live in Hollywood and Southern California. My heart goes to all of you. Please stay safe. Keep your family and your pets safe. Whatever you can salvage, do so, but please move away from the danger. There's a lot of fires going on here in my town in Tijuana. There's an advisory too. I think tomorrow is going to be very chaotic. When that happens here, usually the electricity goes out pretty quickly. So I may not be able to record tomorrow. So I'm recording on Tuesday, and I'm going to try and release it tomorrow. So happy Wednesday, everybody. That being said, I wanted to talk about this podcast, the Ecosystemic Futures Podcast, and another podcast that Chrissy Newton did, I think it was a few weeks ago, with Dr. Ragsdale, who spoke about new technologies and the advancements in new science and potential reverse engineering of craft materials.
But more back to your question about policy, I think it's more of a culture. A culture. We've got to have a culture in the federal government that is more open to edge science topics.
Yes, very
That's
much so.
to me. And then you can get rapid movement.
This is the first time ever that people that are tied to the government and NASA and all of these places and high places in the government talk about this stuff so openly and so candidly. The Ecosystemic Futures Podcast Episode 65 had Travis Taylor, Dr. Hal Puthoff, and Ryan Graves. And the co-host name is known Dr. Anna Brady-Estevez, who is the co-chair of U.S. Interagency Space Economy and Advanced Manufacturing Working Groups. She also works for the U.S. National Science Foundation. So she's in a position to know about these things. And she was already planning on doing these podcasts with people within the technology and science industries. And the fact that they're talking about this tells me that something is already going on behind the scenes. And I started doing some digging. I have friends who manage some funds. They manage money and they manage new technology money. And some of them started realizing that there's a lot of money being allocated to some type of new tech. And they're putting it under like generic names, but you can tell that it's new tech. That's when I know that a lot of people within the hedge fund world and the money world started looking at UAP as something serious, because major corporations are already looking at this as something really serious. And if you wonder why people like Elon Musk, who owns Tesla and SpaceX and Twitter, are denying that UAP are real, that only has to do with the contracts that are still currently tying him from saying anything. So look at it this way. Elon has contracts with pretty much every country in the world for Starlink, for Tesla, and if he came out and said, yes, this is real, UFOs have existed forever, whatever. If he did that, that would affect any of these contracts with the governments that he has, because potentially those who are keeping the secret are governments, in part. Also, private corporations, too. And Elon Musk has ties to Peter Thiel, whom he founded PayPal with. Peter Thiel, as you guys know, has Palantir. That's a major security and defense industry firm that has been accused of several things. But those would be the companies that are moving towards the major breakthroughs in technology, science, and weaponry. And if they wanted to move towards that, they would want to be quiet about it. So I now know, and I have it in good authority to tell you that yes, there's a lot of money, billions, being allocated to these potentially disruptive technologies. And the fact that now people from NASA, who, as you know, has been very secretive about a lot of this stuff, are now openly talking about this in podcasts with none other than Dr. Hal Puthoff and other people like Richard Banduric, who I'm going to play you some of the stuff that he talked about because I know Hal's admissions were pretty shocking. But this guy is talking about like black triangles and intelligent materials that transfigurate and disintegrate, and they come from extraterrestrials. And this guy, you should look at his patents and the type of work he's doing. This guy knows what he's talking about. So I think that something already happened. There was already some type of breakthrough where I can't put my finger on yet is whether this breakthrough happened because humans made it happen or because they successfully reverse engineered some type of down craft. That is the big question, I think. And I believe that over the next couple of years or so, we're going to keep seeing these types of conversations more openly and the technology and the startup world because and also this is also coinciding with the the potential discovery of AGI, which is artificial general intelligence. And if that happens, I don't know what the future holds for us. I already talked about this singularity in one of my previous videos, link in the description. And it seems like things are accelerating in terms of new science and breakthroughs, especially in propulsion. But I want you to listen to Mr. Banduric talking about this and how, like, casually he's mentioning things that should be considered science fiction. But now that someone like this, with his credentials and they're extensive, is talking about this, what else are they not talking about? If this is already a free game for people to talk about in public, what are they hiding from us? Because as you guys know, I'm a big fan of Jesse Michaels, and his investigation into Thomas Townsend Brown talks about potentially this breakthrough in anti-gravity being cracked in the early 50s. And if that happened, if it happened, it means that humans have had this technology since the early 50s. What have they been doing with that? And why now is it public and seemingly entering the stock market slowly, but I think it will get there. Why is it happening now? Did they discover some other breakthrough, or are they doing it due to some urgency that is making them move forward rapidly? I want to know, and I would love to ask either of these people, Dr. Estevez, Dr. Banduric, and Dr. Hal Puthoff, about all of this. Whether I get to ask them or not remains to be seen, but I am reaching out. So be on the lookout for that. But I want you guys to just realize how important this moment is in history. And I'm going to link the podcast that Chrissy Newton did with Rags, the 65th and 69th episode of the Ecosystemic Futures Podcast, so you guys can see what I'm talking about. But now I'm going to play you the Richard Bandurich summary and the most interesting quotes from coming from him about these technologies. Here it is.
they were smart materials. Like one of the things is when these materials, you'd be looking at them and you try to reverse engineer them, that they would turn to dust. And they would do it within a minute or two. And then so you could take the dust and then set it off and get the isotopic analysis done on them. And they were extraterrestrial. But these materials, I mean, we're looking at something that's hundreds of years ahead of us. When you look under a microscope, an electron microscope, you're looking at something that's composed of very small particles that seem to be communicating with one another. So those are the things that I've been involved in that we can talk about. But, I think that's one of the reasons why extraterrestrial materials are not really available to most people, is because most of them are set to disintegrate if they get in the wrong hand. Isotopic analysis of the dust that's left behind tells you it's extraterrestrial, at least where it was manufactured. But so we're looking at materials that can reconfigure themselves. They are composed of small subunits. So the type of things I looked at were something as small as a sliver of metal that would reconfigure itself depending on where it was. It would cloak itself and it would try to blend into the environment. So the ones that this one NGO used to get a hold of were the ones that were technically broken. I guess the ones that didn't really function very well. So then you could collect them every once in a while and then try to analyze them. You could do things like split them apart. They would attempt to find each other or reconfigure. Some of the experiments they did was we took one of those and we put it on a very hot surface of about 3,000 degrees. And what it would do is it cooled the surface around itself. And then when we took the device off and then waited again, we would find that the mass would be reduced by a certain amount.
Do these feel like programmed materials to you, Richard?
Yeah, they were, like I was saying, they're more intelligent materials. Like these subunits probably had computational functionality, right? Because they knew what their neighbors were all about, and they knew they could reprogram themselves to be something different, right? If they needed to change themselves. So these are really curious types of materials. So that's how we could kind of tell they were extraterrestrial, because these things weren't like decades ahead of us. They were probably hundreds of years ahead of us. I'm CEO of Field Propulsion Technologies. My background is electrical engineering and mathematics. And 40 years ago, I was involved in a company, the part owner that used to do reverse engineering. And one of the things that came out of there, some of the NGOs that were trying to reverse engineer advanced technologies that pinged us to look at some of the stuff they had. And that got me really curious, because this stuff was definitely way more advanced than we actually have. So one of the things that ended up getting pulled into classified programs. And one of the things I wanted to look at was to see if the U.S. government actually was using these technologies. And it turned out that my conclusion was the U.S. government was not. So the ones that I worked with were trying to figure out how these rather large craft, which people call triangles, would be able to disappear on a dime. So when we were set up looking at these triangles, when they decloaked and they recloaked, we didn't see anything like that. What we really saw was it appeared to be that these triangles were taking whatever was behind them and actually projecting it in front of them, which might be equivalent to taking their light rays and bending it around the actual triangle. And so our conclusion, they were doing something along those lines. They were probably doing it with a lot less energy. But some of the conditions we observed them on was a lot of times where they were observing behind them would be a little different than what we would be observing. So what they would do is we would assume would be projecting what's behind them in front of them, but it really wouldn't be quite what we would be seeing. And then we had an idea that we could probably track these triangles because their cloak or whatever they're using to bend the light around them was never going to be exactly the same. So some of that work that I was doing with NGOs was really exciting. But one of the other things that comes out of this is these individuals or whoever this group is that has this advanced technology probably does not want us to reverse engineer what they're working on. So they're probably using their methods or their technologies to try to keep us from doing things like reverse engineering or exploring how they work, just because of the fact that gives them an advantage over us. Their cloak or whatever they're using to bend the light around them was never going to be exactly the same. So some of that work that I was doing with NGOs was really exciting. But one of the other things that comes out of this is these individuals or whoever this group is that has this advanced technology probably does not want us to reverse engineer what they're working on. So they're probably using their methods or their technologies to try to keep us from doing things like reverse engineering or exploring how they work, just because of the fact that gives them an advantage over us. So a lot of my work really comes out of the work I do with NGOs. And I think we are on the cusp of actually developing new technologies, because I think we're all here on this group. We're all working all on kind of in the same direction, where I think within 5 or 10 years, a couple of us, or hopefully us, will have new technologies out here that'll change the world. And I think propulsion is one of them. Like I said, I think we're really on the cusp of actually being able to develop propulsion. No, it's so I'm kind of limited. But, one thing I did notice is looking at some of these materials is they were smart materials. Like one of the things is when these materials, you'd be looking at them and you try to reverse engineer them, that they would turn to dust. And they would do it within a minute or two. And then so you could take the dust and then set it off and get the isotopic analysis done on them. And they were extraterrestrial. But these materials, I mean, we're looking at something that's hundreds of years ahead of us. When you look under a microscope, an electron microscope, you're looking at something that's composed of very small particles that seem to be communicating with one another. So those are the things that I've been involved in that we can talk about. But, I think that's one of the reasons why extraterrestrial materials are not really available to most people, is because most of them are set to disintegrate if they get in the wrong hand. No, well, it's the isotopic analysis of the dust that's left behind tells you it's extraterrestrial, at least where it was manufactured. But so we're looking at materials that can reconfigure themselves. They are composed of small subunits. So the type of things I looked at were something as small as a sliver of metal that would reconfigure itself depending on where it was. It would cloak itself and it would try to blend into the environment. So the ones that this one NGO used to get a hold of were the ones that were technically broken. I guess the ones that didn't really function very well. So then you could collect them every once in a while and then try to analyze them. You could do things like split them apart. And they would attempt to find each other or reconfigure. Some of the experiments they did was we took one of those and we put it on a very hot surface of about 3,000 degrees. And what it would do is it cooled the surface around itself. And then when we took the device off and then waited again, we would find that the mass would be reduced by a certain amount. So these are really curious types of materials. So that's how we could kind of tell they were extraterrestrial, because these things weren't like decades ahead of us. Yeah, so we were looking at very little things. They seem to deposit all over the world. We weren't estimating there's probably trillions of these things that are deposited, and they have all sorts of functions, which really kind of implies that maybe this group is actually manipulating our species. But you can still acquire those. You know where to look for them. We know how to find them. Yeah, they were, like I was saying, they're more intelligent materials. Like these subunits probably had computational functionality, right? Because they knew what their neighbors were all about, and they knew they could reprogram themselves to be something different, right? If they needed to change themselves.
How about that? So just to remind you guys about what Dr. Hal Puthoff said, let me play you this one from the Kosher Twitter account. Shout out Kosher, who does a lot of great clips of important podcasts. He's done some of mine, I think, but he did a wonderful job here. And this is what Dr. Hal Puthoff said on the Ecosystemic Futures Podcast. Here it is.
We found that they were layered alloys at the micron levels, and none of our technologists, even in the big aerospace corporations, could make these layers bond together. So just by their physical construction, we could tell it was way beyond anything that had been manufactured in our ordinary technology here on Earth.
Yeah, that's what I saw too. You were looking at the outside of a craft or materials that came from a crashed spacecraft or something?
Yes.
Yeah, so we were looking at very little things. They seem to deposit all over the world. We weren't estimating there's probably trillions of these things that are deposited, and they have all sorts of functions, which really kind of implies that maybe this group is actually manipulating our species. But you can still acquire those. You know where to look for them. We know how to find them.
Well, if you find a hatful, why don't you send them our way and we'll take a look at them.
Yeah, that's it. So the group I used to work with, I don't talk with anymore because they got upset at me for talking. So, but I have an idea where someone could get them.
I guess what you're saying, Richard, is they're ubiquitous, right? And so there's a variety of sources in terms of where to get these.
Yeah. We were assuming that they're everywhere, right? Even the ones that would work, we would never be able to find because they would cloak themselves or reconfigure themselves to be something. But not all of them are functional, right?
Yeah, so there's evidently some type of sea change that already happened, and we need to start talking about it. Because alongside the whole nuts and bolts revolution that seems to be starting right now, there's also the telepathy tapes that talks about human capabilities. And I think that is also something that is part of this approaching of the singularity. It's all happening. It's all happening. So I don't know if it's going to be good for the majority of humanity. I hope so. One can only be hopeful about what's going to happen in the future. And yeah, let's just try and stay in that frequency, shall we? Meanwhile, let's keep asking questions and stay open minded. I guarantee that if we stay open minded and try to be positive, we're going to be able to mitigate some of the negativity. I honestly believe that. So let's do it together, yeah? And that's going to be it for my video. Let me know what you think in the comments. What do you think about this money being allocated to new tech? A lot of money. What do you think about hedge funds expressing interest in UAP-derived technology? And what do you think about what Dr. Banduric and Dr. Hal Puthoff are saying in these clips? Do you think they already have something? Do you think they may have already cracked this faster than light communication that they talk about? Or quantum satellites, quantum computing, which should be part of this? And what about these materials that dematerialize or turn into dust? And with those capabilities of transfiguration, and that's really weird. You know what that reminds me of? The way that the craft in the movie Arrival disappear, how they turn into a cloud, basically. That's what it reminds me of. And it's really, really weird and exciting and scary at the same time. But yeah, that's going to be it for me today. If you like the content you see, I'm going to ask you to please hit the like and subscribe buttons. We just crossed 13,000 subscribers. Thank you so much for the support. Let's hope we can get to 20K by March, if possible. I think it's possible. And I'm going to ask you to please share the content in any platform you like, if you find any value in it, that is. And if you want to support the channel in any other way, there's a bunch of links in the description. Take your pick. Thank you for the support. You can also be part of the members channel. I'm not usually right now producing a lot of content exclusive for you guys, but you guys see the grind is real. I try to produce a daily video, but as soon as I see that there are more people in the members channel, I will start doing more exclusive content there. Right now, there's not that many of you, but I encourage you to, if you find it within you to help the channel, that would be a great way to do it. That can offer the channel a steady stream, so we can get more infrastructure and more manpower and all that stuff to do even better things. Right now, it's just me. And that's it for me today. And I'll see you guys on the next video. Bye.